Every single morning, without fail, a little boy in Connecticut would run to the window. Not for cartoons, not for his breakfast, not even for his toys, though he had plenty of those. For the mail truck. His name was Colby, and he was 2 years old, and somewhere in the mysterious wiring of a toddler's heart, the United States Postal Service had become the single most thrilling thing in his entire universe. He didn't just like mail trucks. He didn't just enjoy watching them rumble past. He loved them. The way 2-year-olds love things, which is to say, completely, unconditionally, and with a focus that would embarrass most adults. And above all else, above the trucks and the uniforms and the packages and the whole magnificent operation of it, he loved the man who drove one down his street every day, the man his family called Mailman Mike. This is the story of what happened on July 24th, 2023, in a quiet Connecticut suburb, when a mother made one simple phone call and a postal worker of 37 years decided that a little boy's second birthday deserved something a little more than a card. Before we get to the birthday, you have to understand the love story. Not a birthday party kind of love story, a 2-year-old and a mail truck kind of love story, which is both more innocent and somehow more pure than most of the other kinds. It had started, the way these things always start with toddlers, gradually and then all at once. Somewhere around the 18-month mark, Colby Bergman of Simsbury, Connecticut, had become aware that large vehicles existed in the world, and that some of them, the white ones, with the blue stripe and the little eagle on the side, came down his street every single day at roughly the same time, driven by the same cheerful man in the same blue uniform. His mother, Jessica, would later describe it to Today as a hardcore obsession that had built over the previous 6 months, but that's almost underselling it. This was a child who identified mail trucks the way birdwatchers identify rare species, spotting them from remarkable distances, announcing them to whoever happened to be nearby, pressing his small face against car windows with the focused intensity of someone tracking something precious. "We look for mail trucks in the wild," Jessica told Today, "in the wild," as if mail trucks were a naturally occurring phenomenon to be tracked and documented, rather than a scheduled municipal service operating on a fixed route. But for Colby, they might as well have been. Every single truck was an event, every single delivery was something to witness, and every single day that Mailman Mike came down their street was, in the calendar of a 2-year-old's life, a genuinely good day. He would wait for him, actually wait, with the specific, focused patience that toddlers almost never apply to anything except the things they love most. He knew the time, he knew the sound of the truck before it came around the corner. And when it did come, and when Mike climbed down from the cab and walked up to the door and spotted his smallest regular customer watching from the window or the porch, well, those were the moments. Mailman Mike is Colby's hero, Jessica said. And she meant every word of it, in the completely literal way that a mother means something when she tells you who her 2-year-old has chosen to admire most in the world. Here is something that matters for this story. Mike Malashowski had been delivering mail in Simsbury, Connecticut for 37 years. 37 years. Think about what that means for a moment. Not in terms of career statistics or postal service tenure, but in terms of a town and a person and the slow, daily accumulation of showing up. 37 years of the same streets, the same houses, the same doors. 37 years of faces that have aged while his route has stayed more or less the same. Children who were born after he started his route, who now have children of their own who he delivers to. There is a particular kind of person who does the same job in the same place for 37 years, not because they were trapped by circumstance or couldn't find anything else, but because they genuinely love what they do and where they do it. Mike Malashowski is that kind of person. The evidence is everywhere in the way this story unfolds, but it starts here, with the simple fact of 37 years. In those 37 years, Mike had become more than a postal worker. He had become a fixture of the community in the way that only daily presence can create, the kind of person that a town absorbs into its identity without quite noticing it happening, until suddenly you realize that a particular route, a particular face, a particular daily wave from a mail truck has become part of how a neighborhood understands itself. He knew people, he knew their schedules, he knew their dogs, he knew which houses had changed hands and which had stayed in the same family for decades. He was, in the most literal and unglamorous sense of the word, the thread that connected a community to itself, the daily proof that someone reliable would show up, would deliver what was expected, would keep the small promise of the postal service one more time. And when Colby Bergman started appearing in windows and on porches every day to watch for the mail truck, Mike noticed. How could he not? A 2-year-old whose entire face lights up when your truck comes around the corner is not something you drive past without feeling something. He started making a point of it, a wave, a honk, a moment of contact between a man in a mail truck and a very small boy who thought that man had quite possibly the coolest job on the planet. It was a small thing, repeated daily, the way all small things that eventually matter are built, one ordinary gesture at a time. The birthday was coming up. July 24th, Colby was turning 2. Jessica Bergman was planning a party, a mail truck-themed party, because of course it was. Because when your child has one consuming passion and you are a devoted mother, the birthday party theme selects itself without any input from anyone. Mail truck cake, mail truck decorations, a tiny postal service counter, and somewhere in the planning, Jessica had a thought. What if Mailman Mike could drive by? Just drive by. That was the full extent of the ask. Just make an appearance, give a honk, let Colby see his hero on his big day. It seemed like a reasonable thing to request of someone who drove past their house every day anyway. Jessica called the post office. She got through to Mike. She explained who she was and asked if he might be able to swing past on July 24th as a birthday treat for her son. Mike said he'd see what he could do. What he did was considerably more than drive by. He went to his supervisors and asked for permission to organize something larger. He made phone calls, not just to the post office, but to the fire department, the police department, the waste management company, the sanitation workers he had spent 37 years building relationships with in the course of doing his job. He pulled in favors from people who knew him and trusted him, because you don't spend 37 years in a community without accumulating a remarkable number of people who will say yes when you call and ask for something. I've worked in town for 37 years, he would later say, so I asked my friends in all those departments. Friends, not contacts, not colleagues, friends. That single word tells you everything about how Mike Malashowski has spent those 37 years and what those years have built. He organized a parade. Jessica didn't know any of this was coming. The morning of July 24th, 2023, Colby Bergman woke up as a 2-year-old, which is to say he woke up with the same relentless enthusiasm he applied to every morning, pointed at the world with the specific energy of a child who doesn't yet know that some days are ordinary. This one was not going to be ordinary, but he didn't know that yet either. Jessica had set up the birthday decorations. The mail truck cake sat in the kitchen. The postal service counter was assembled. The balloons were up. Colby wore a little postal worker's uniform, sized down to fit a 2-year-old, which is one of those details that exists purely to be the most adorable thing you have ever seen. His 4-year-old sister Haley was there. The family's nanny was there. They gathered at the edge of the driveway, the way families do for outdoor birthday surprises, and Jessica pointed Colby toward the street. And then, in the distance, there was a flash of white and blue. A single USPS mail truck coming down the street with its lights on. Colby's reaction was immediate and total. This is the thing about 2-year-olds and the things they love. There is no modulation, no playing it cool, no appropriate adult management of visible enthusiasm. When Colby saw that truck, he saw it with his whole body. But then something happened that nobody in the Bergman family was expecting. The mail truck didn't slow down and drive past. More trucks came into view, then a fire truck, then another mail truck, then police vehicles with lights flashing, then garbage trucks, actual working garbage trucks, which actually stopped and picked up the garbage, because this is the kind of day it was. And then more trucks, and more. The whole parade of Simsbury's municipal services coming down the residential street in a procession that made absolutely no sense on an ordinary Tuesday, and made complete and perfect sense on this one. Colby stood at the edge of the driveway and watched it all arrive. His expression, captured in Jessica's video, is something that is very difficult to describe in words, but you know it when you see it, because you have felt a version of it yourself, when something happened that was so much more than you expected, that for a moment the gap between what you anticipated and what you received was simply too large for your face to fully process. It is the expression of someone being given more than they knew how to ask for. Jessica, behind the camera, was crying. She hadn't expected any of this either. She had made one phone call asking if a mail carrier might drive past, and somehow the entire municipal infrastructure of Simsbury, Connecticut had shown up at her son's birthday party. There's a couple from my hometown that people still talk about sometimes. Not in the dramatic kind of way. Nobody ever called them soulmates back then. Nobody looked at them and thought they were part of some grand love story that would survive generations. Most people just knew them as Walter and Eleanor, two quiet old people who walked very slowly together through the farmer's market every Saturday morning, no matter the weather. Walter always wore the same brown jacket with the worn elbows. Eleanor always carried one of those little folding shopping carts, even when there was barely anything inside it. If you saw them near the end of their lives, you'd probably assume they had been together forever, but the strange thing was, most of their lives were actually spent apart. Walter was 92 when they got married. Eleanor was 90. And somehow, after nearly 70 years of knowing each other, they still acted nervous around one another sometimes. Walter first met Eleanor in the summer of 1951. At least that's the version he always told. Eleanor claimed it was autumn. They argued about it for years. Walter insisted it was summer because he remembered sweating through his shirt while standing outside the old pharmacy on Maple Street waiting for the bus. Eleanor said it had to be autumn because she remembered leaves blowing across the sidewalk and the fact that she was borrowing her sister's yellow coat. Either way, Walter noticed her immediately, not because she was loud or beautiful in some movie star kind of way. He always said it was because she looked completely calm while everybody around her seemed rushed. Even at 17 years old, Eleanor apparently carried herself like someone much older. Walter, on the other hand, was awkward beyond belief. The first time he tried speaking to her, he accidentally dropped a glass Coke bottle outside the diner across the street and it shattered across the sidewalk. Eleanor laughed so hard she snorted, which embarrassed her enough that she walked away without even telling him her name. Walter apparently replayed that moment in his head for weeks afterward. That's another thing about real love stories people don't talk about enough. Most of them start embarrassingly, not elegantly. A few days later, he saw her again sitting alone inside the diner near the window reading a newspaper while eating pie. He spent almost 20 minutes outside trying to build up the courage to walk in. The waitress eventually opened the door herself and yelled, "You gonna stand there staring all day or what?" Walter told that story every anniversary after they got married. Eleanor hated it because she said it made him sound pathetic. Maybe he was, but he walked inside, and somehow that became the beginning of everything. They started seeing each other slowly after that. Not official dates at first, more like excuses to accidentally exist near one another. Walter would walk Eleanor home from church even when it added 40 minutes to his own walk back. Eleanor started pretending to need groceries from the market Walter worked at, even though the prices there were worse. There was one story Eleanor's younger sister told years later about catching Walter standing outside their house one evening holding a peach pie he had baked himself. Apparently, he forgot pot holders and burned both his hands carrying it. The pie itself was terrible, completely raw in the middle. Eleanor still ate some of it anyway while Walter sat there apologizing over and over. That's the kind of detail nobody invents. By winter, they were inseparable. Walter had started military training around that time though, and everybody knew eventually he'd be sent overseas. People forget how normal that used to be. Young men would disappear for years, and life simply expected everybody else to continue moving. Still, Walter and Eleanor made promises to each other the way young people do when they think love alone can defeat time. Walter told her he'd come back and marry her. Eleanor believed him. I think he believed it too. The night before Walter left, they sat together on the hood of his truck outside the lake just beyond town limits. Walter later admitted neither of them really talked much that night. They mostly just listened to crickets and watched headlights move along the distant highway. At one point, Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder and quietly asked, "What if we become different people?" Walter didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Then hopefully we become different people together." Eleanor cried when she repeated that story decades later, because that's not what happened. At first, they wrote constantly, sometimes twice a week. Walter's letters wandered all over the place. Half the time, he barely even discussed himself. He described strange meals he ate overseas or complained about rain leaking through ceilings wherever he was stationed. One letter was apparently almost entirely about a stray dog that followed him through a train station in Germany. Eleanor kept that one folded inside a cookbook for over 60 years, not because it was romantic, because it sounded like him. That's the thing people misunderstand about long love. Eventually, it's the ordinary details you miss most. The way somebody complains, the weird stories they tell, the exact phrasing they use. Eleanor wrote differently. Her letters were careful and neat, and usually much shorter. She'd tell Walter about town gossip, weather changes, or what flowers had started blooming behind the church. Sometimes she included pressed flowers inside the envelopes. Walter kept every one, even after everything that happened later. But life has a way of slowly interrupting people. Eleanor's father got sick first, then Walter's deployments became longer. Phone calls back then were expensive and rare. Weeks became months, months became years. And eventually, something dangerous happened. They started adjusting to the silence, not all at once. Slowly, painfully slowly. Eleanor eventually met another man through church, a stable man, kind, local, the kind of man her family trusted. Walter was still overseas when she got engaged. Apparently, she sat awake nearly the entire night before finally mailing the letter telling him. Walter received it weeks later. Years afterward, he admitted he reread the letter so many times the folds nearly tore apart. But even then, he said he understood. That's the heartbreaking part. Nobody betrayed anybody. Life simply kept moving forward. Walter married too eventually, had children, worked maintenance at a middle school for decades. Eleanor became a librarian and raised 3 daughters, and somehow they continued orbiting each other across the years without fully reconnecting. Sometimes it was accidental, a funeral, a Christmas card, passing each other in the grocery store. One time in the late 70s, Walter apparently drove 3 hours just to attend a retirement dinner where he knew Eleanor might be there, not because he planned on speaking to her, just because he wanted to see her again. He sat 3 tables away the entire night, never approached her once. Eleanor later admitted she noticed him immediately when he walked in. She remembered exactly what tie he wore. That's what makes this story sad to me. Not that they lost each other, it's that they never completely did. Their spouses both passed away within a few years of one another, after they were already deep into old age. By then, Walter's hands shook badly from arthritis. Eleanor walked carefully after a hip surgery. Most people at that age are surrounded more by memories than plans. But somehow, after almost 60 years, they slowly found their way back into each other's daily lives. Walter started visiting Eleanor every Thursday evening. At first, it was under practical excuses, fixing loose cabinets, changing light bulbs, helping shovel snow. But Eleanor's daughter later said Walter would often spend 3 hours fixing things that were perfectly fine. Really, he just wanted reasons to stay. The two of them would sit together drinking weak coffee while old game shows played quietly in the background. Sometimes they barely talked. And strangely, those might have been their happiest moments. Because when you love somebody for that long, silence stops feeling uncomfortable. It starts feeling earned. One winter morning, Eleanor slipped on ice near her mailbox. Nothing life-threatening, just bruises. But Walter cried when he saw her arm in a sling. Actually cried. Her daughter said that was the moment she realized something. These two people had spent their entire adult lives accidentally waiting for each other, and suddenly time didn't feel unlimited anymore. Walter proposed one rainy afternoon while they were eating canned tomato soup in Eleanor's kitchen. No ring, no dramatic speech. He just looked at her quietly for a few seconds and said, "Well, we probably shouldn't waste more time." Eleanor laughed so hard she started crying. Then Walter started crying too. They got married 6 months later in a tiny church with maybe 15 people attending. Walter wore an old gray suit he already owned because he said buying a new one at 92 felt financially irresponsible. That was his exact phrase. Eleanor carried flowers clipped from her own garden early that morning. There's a photograph from that wedding that always stayed with me. Not the one where they kiss, not the posed family pictures either. It's one taken during the ceremony itself. Walter is staring down at their hands, while Eleanor squeezes his fingers gently, and he looks almost confused, like some part of him genuinely never expected to live long enough to finally stand there beside her. Two people who lost nearly 60 years somehow still finding their way back to one another. That image honestly says more about love than most movies ever could. Walter died peacefully 2 years later. Eleanor passed less than a year after him. Her daughter said that near the end, Eleanor spent a lot of time rereading old letters beside the window in the afternoons, especially the boring ones, the letters about weather, the train rides, the sandwiches Walter hated. One of the nurses asked her once why those letters mattered so much. Eleanor smiled and said, "Because that's where his life was." And according to her daughter, one of the final things Eleanor ever said before she died was, "I'm just glad we made it back to each other." Not "I love him," not some dramatic final sentence, just "I'm glad we made it back." And honestly, I think that might be the most beautiful love story I've ever heard. At 260 pounds, people called him a monster, not because he hurt anyone, but because he looked like someone who could. When he walked into gyms, people stared. At competitions, crowds screamed his name. Online, strangers admired him like he was something superhuman. And for years, he chased that feeling, because if people feared you, they couldn't hurt you. But every morning, that same monster walked into a kindergarten classroom, tiny backpacks, finger paintings, alphabet songs, kids sitting in chairs barely bigger than his legs. The contrast made no sense. A professional bodybuilder teaching children how to draw. People looked at him and saw aggression. The children eventually saw something else, but that didn't happen immediately. At first, they were terrified of him. Long before the trophies, before the muscle, before the stage lights, there was just insecurity, the kind nobody notices in men, the kind men are taught to hide. So he learned early, never look weak, never look emotional, never let people know when you're hurting. The gym became the perfect escape for that, because weights don't judge you, weights don't leave you, weights make sense. Lift harder, get bigger, become harder to ignore. Eventually, the gym stopped being a hobby. It became his identity. He stopped being a person and started becoming a project. Every day followed the same cycle. Wake up before sunrise, train until his vision blurred, force down meals even when he felt sick. Chicken, rice, broccoli. Repeat, again tomorrow, again next week, again next year. And slowly, his body transformed into something massive, something intimidating, something impossible to overlook. People finally respected him. At least, that's what it looked like on the outside. But there's something strange that happens when your entire identity becomes strength. People stop asking how you feel, and eventually, you stop asking yourself. The stronger he looked physically, the more emotionally distant he became. He could train through pain, but he couldn't talk about loneliness. He could push his body past exhaustion, but couldn't admit insecurity. So instead, he kept building muscle, because muscle was easier than vulnerability. Every competition ended the same way. Thousands of people screaming his name, camera flashes, crowds, noise, energy. Then, 10 minutes later, he'd be sitting alone in a silent hotel room, eating cold chicken and rice from a plastic container at 1 a.m. trophy on the counter. Phone silent, no celebration, no connection, just emptiness. And one night, something finally broke inside him. He stared at a trophy he once dreamed about winning and felt absolutely nothing. No excitement, no pride, just silence. That terrified him because he realized something. He had spent years becoming admired without ever feeling understood. The world saw confidence, but internally, he was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, because carrying armor every day is heavy, especially when you forget how to take it off. He had built a version of himself that looked invincible, but invincible people become isolated. Nobody comforts the strong guy, nobody checks on the strong guy, and eventually, even he forgot there was still a human underneath all that muscle. His apartment reflected it perfectly. Meal prep containers, supplements, gym bags, trophies, but almost nothing personal. No warmth, no life, just discipline. Over and over, he chased bigger lifts, bigger stages, bigger muscles, hoping eventually it would fill whatever emptiness followed him home every night. It never did. He didn't wake up one morning and randomly decide to teach children. It happened slowly. A friend asked if he could help at a local kindergarten for a few days. That was it. Nothing dramatic, no inspirational speech, just a favor. At the time, he almost said no, because honestly, he had no idea how to interact with children. The first morning he walked into the classroom, everything went quiet. Some of the kids froze. One little boy moved closer to his teacher. A little girl whispered, "He looks scary." And honestly, he understood. He looked like someone built for destruction, not gentleness, not safety, not comfort. Even sitting in the tiny classroom chairs looked ridiculous. His arms barely fit on the table. His legs looked too big for the room itself. But over the next few days, something unexpected started happening. The children slowly moved closer. One asked him for help coloring. Another asked him to tie their shoe. One little boy who was afraid of him at first eventually sat beside him during story time. Children don't care about status. They don't care about trophies. They don't care how much you bench press. They notice something else: energy, patience, kindness, safety. And for the first time in years, people weren't approaching him because they were impressed. They approached him because they trusted him. That changed everything. One afternoon, A little girl in the class started crying. She missed her parents. Nothing was calming her down. The other teachers tried talking to her. Nothing worked. Eventually, he slowly walked over and sat beside her, this giant bodybuilder, squeezing himself into a tiny plastic classroom chair. He didn't force conversation, didn't try fixing anything. He just sat there, quietly beside her, patiently, and after a few minutes, the little girl wrapped her arms around him, then whispered something he would never forget. "You make me feel safe." Safe. Not powerful, not impressive, not intimidating. Safe. And suddenly, everything shifted. Because all his life, he thought strength meant becoming someone nobody could hurt. But sitting in that tiny classroom, he realized real strength was something completely different. Real strength was making other people feel protected. People online still don't fully understand him. Some laugh at him, some think it's strange, a professional bodybuilder, working with children. But maybe that's exactly why the story matters, because the strongest people in the world usually aren't the loudest or the most feared. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones willing to become soft again after life taught them hardness. Now every morning, instead of stepping onto a bodybuilding stage, he walks into a classroom, tiny shoes by the door, messy drawings taped to the walls, children laughing, crayons scattered across tables, and somehow, after spending years trying to become larger than life, this small classroom became the first place he truly felt human. For most of his life, he built a body nobody would dare challenge, but deep down, he was still the insecure kid who never felt fully seen. He thought muscles would protect him from insecurity. He thought success would fix loneliness. He thought becoming stronger would finally make him enough. But in the end, it wasn't the trophies that changed his life. It was a room full of children who taught him something bodybuilding never could. That real strength has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with making people feel safe. The world saw a monster, the children saw a protector, and maybe, for the first time in his life, he finally saw himself too.